What's wrong, Reddit? Go easy on me. I've been wondering whether to post this. I'm 19, and to be honest, for as long as I can remember, my life has been somewhat of a roller coaster. Still, this isn't a pity party. It's about what happened when I at last chose to take charge of both my house of upbringing and my life. Let's say things got messy, not in a fun way. Some background. I lost Dad at the age of 10. It sucked naturally. He was my best buddy, not only my dad. He left our house and some savings in a trust fund. My grandparents have been handling it since I was a small child. Before I became 18, my mother had complete access since, she was supposed to be looking after me. The house was meant to be legally mine, except that hardly quite went according. When I was 12, my mother remarried a man named John, not his actual name, who brought 2 of his own children. Suddenly I felt as though my mother had a brand new family, and I was simply there, like an old couch they hadn't gotten around to discarding. At first I attempted to make it work. I was 12, and had no other idea what else to do. John was not horrible to me, but he was not fantastic either. Treated me like a visitor in my own house, and his children, not even what I want to start. Simply noisy, untidy, and entitled. They were not malicious or anything. They completely ignored me most of the time, took over the living room, left their belongings all around, and by high school, I knew I had to do it myself. I had worked out what I wanted. Too busy playing supermom to John's children was my mom. The only place I felt I had any influence was my room. Even that started to alter. Old toys, odd trash, and even clothing cartons began to seep in from John's children. One evening I returned home to find a damaged scooter in my room's corner. My mother only shrugged and said there was no room in the garage when I questioned her about it. By now I was visiting my grandparents more often than I was at home. They listened, truly helped me with school, and cared. My grandfather, particularly, always had my back. Though he speaks few words, he is always sure what to do. See, a few weeks before my 18th birthday, fast forward. Sitting me down to discuss the house were my grandparents. I nodded along, but inwardly I was thinking, cool, but nothing's really going to change, right? My grandpa, relaxed as usual, continued, the house is yours shortly, legally. You'll have full authority. It's up to you what you want to do with it. Man, was I misguided? So I'm genuinely rather psyched tonight before my 18th birthday. Turning 18 is significant, isn't it? You can vote. In my case, I was at last going to own the house. You are theoretically an adult. It seemed like a fresh start. I had a pleasant birthday, nothing wild, perhaps a family dinner, a cake, and some little presents to help to celebrate the day. Yes, but no, clearly not. My mother walks in as I'm on the couch browsing through my phone. She had that spaced-out face she always gets when she's not really focused. She is carrying a travel bag. She replies, sounding as though she is reminding me to take out the garbage. We're leaving tomorrow for a vacation. Just me, John, and the kids. You don't mind staying here alone, right? I turned to blink at her. I honestly felt I had misheard. Wait, you're leaving tomorrow. That's my birthday. She glanced hardly at all. Yeah, I know. But we have months of travel planned ahead. You'll be fine. You're old enough to handle yourself. Order some pizza or something. Order some pizza or something else. For my 18th birthday, that was her major goal. Not one party, not one meal, not even a recognition that the day really counted. Like I wanted to yell, "Are you serious right now?" I felt this rage building in my chest, but I didn't. What would the point be? So I just sat there, totally unconcerned, staring at her as she turned away. I woke up the following morning to find suitcases sliding down the corridor. Still half asleep as I got up, I headed into the kitchen. There they were, my mother, John, and the children, looking like the ideal family, all dressed in their vacation attire. As she poured some coffee, my mother glanced at me. "Oh, good, you're up. Don't forget to lock the door when we go." Feeling like I was holding back a tidal wave, I leaned against the counter and watched them laugh and joke, totally ignoring me, and questioned, "So you're really just leaving?" John lifted his phone to look at something. "Come on, man. You're 18. You don't need a babysitter. Moreover, this trip has been booked for weeks." I stood there, clutching the counter so tightly that my knuckles turned white. When my mother said, "We'll be back in a week. There's food in the fridge," she hardly looked at me, and then they just departed. Laughing and chatting as they piled into the car, I waited in the doorway and watched them head for Disneyland. There was no turning back scene. They simply drove off, leaving me standing in my pajamas, feeling as though a vehicle had hit me. I closed the door, locked it as she advised, and for a moment, I simply stood in the empty house. The silence was terrible. I woke up in a strange daze. I wasn't sure whether to be numb, depressed, or enraged. To discover what food my mother had left me, I opened the refrigerator. It was sad. Half a carton of milk, some old takeout containers, and a frozen chicken nuggets box. Cool, I mumbled. Happy freaking birthday to me. My phone buzzed at around noon. Happy birthday, sweetheart. We'll be over soon. Love you. My grandma sent in a text. That book arrived like a lifeline. Without my grandparents, I am not sure what I would have done. About 1 hour later, they arrived bearing a cake, balloons, and a gift bag. The second I unlocked the door, my granny hugged me. Happy birthday, my lad, she said. My grandfather trailed behind her, sporting a wrapped gift and a proud smile. They saved me not only on my birthday. We ate cake and chatted in the living room all day. They related to me tales of my dad, his pride in me, and his great love for her. I felt as though I really mattered to someone for the first time in ages. My grandfather gave me an envelope after cake. This comes from the lawyer, he declared. Official now, the house is yours. When I opened it, the papers proving me the legal owner of the house were right there. My granny grinned. This is your home now, he declared. You handle things. I wasn't sure for a moment about how to feel. On one hand, at last having something that was mine felt fantastic, truly great. Conversely, it let me recognize just how disorganized everything had become. My dad had given me this house as a gift. It was where I should feel cherished and safe. Rather, it had turned into John's playground, and I was considered an unwelcome visitor. Given her hand on my shoulder, my grandma had to have seen the expression on my face. You deserve to be delighted here, she remarked. Remember, you have the ability to change, that should anyone make you feel differently. Her comments stayed with me, but just now I had no idea what to do with them. That evening, when my grandparents left, I was in bed browsing Instagram when I came onto my mother's post. It showed her, John, and the children, all beaming in similar clothes at some elegant resort, though I'm not clear why I clicked on the comments. Not a single mention of myself. It was bursting with things like, what a beautiful family, and you're such an amazing mom. Their family saw me as not part of them. I was neither their brother nor son. I was the man who happened to call their place home. Though I had no idea what I was going to do yet, one thing was very evident. I was not going to continue living this way. This house belonged to me. It was time I began to behave as though it did. I woke up the day after my birthday with an unusual mix of anxiety and will. Though the other side of me was terrified of what that really meant, part of me was ready to take back control. Not precisely as I would have ever stood up to my mother before. It was simpler than handling the aftermath, so most of the time I just closed my mouth. But I couldn't keep doing that following what happened on my birthday. I was not some young child forced to tolerate their garbage anymore. I thus made the decision to closely examine the situation. This house, let me say, was a disaster. Their belongings blanketed the living room. John's tools, the children's toys, and haphazard trash he hadn't bothered to sort. The kitchen is gross is the total. The worst element, though, was my room. Opening the door felt like walking inside a storage facility. Boxes all around. Under piles of papers and outdated magazines, my desk, the one spot I used to sit and complete homework or simply relax, was buried. Almost as if it were an afterthought, my bed was pushed into the corner while their trash took over the rest of the room. Just staring at the carnage, I stood there for a minute and felt something crack inside me. This was a dumping ground rather than a house now, and I quit letting them treat it like one. That afternoon I paid my grandparents a call about the condition of the house, about my mom and John, about how I felt. I told them everything. You have been patient long enough, my grandfather remarked, his voice strong. You have every legal right if you wish them gone. We will support you. Hearing him express inspired trust in me. Though I had always known the house was legally mine, it felt true when my grandfather, the pillar of our family, said it aloud. Still, I understood this would not be simple. I asked politely, so my mother wasn't simply going to pack and head off. I felt I needed a strategy. To ensure there wouldn't be any legal shocks, my grandparents helped me sort through all the documentation from Dad's estate. The attorney verified what we already knew. My mom had no claim to the house. It was mine. Should I so wish, I could send a legal eviction notice and have them depart. Still, the idea of facing my mom made me nervous, even with all that on my side. You're doing the right thing, my grandmother remarked, her voice soft but firm. You deserve to live where you feel respected and cared for. Don't let anyone take that away from you, not even your mother. I began getting ready for what is known to be a battle over the next few days, mostly because I needed something to concentrate on, but also because I wanted to remind myself that this was my space. I tidied as much of the house as I could. I loaded all the trash they had left in my room and piled it in the hall. I cleaned my desk, straightened my bed, and posted a few pictures of my dad straight from an old box. It felt fantastic, as though I were recovering a tiny bit of what had been taken from me. Though I made great effort to concentrate on the positives, the fear persisted. Should my mother object to leaving? What then? Should John become involved and exacerbate things? What would happen? Before, I had seen how they huddled around me, turning every dispute into a twisted blame game whereby I was always the bad person. I knew, nevertheless, I couldn't turn back. A week later, upon returning from their vacation, the breaking point arrived. The front door opened, and they all walked in, dragging their bags into the living room. Looking at me, my mother responded, "Hey," as though she hadn't simply left me on my birthday. The kids were already fighting over who could play on the TV first, while John was throwing some jokes about how costly the vacation had been. I watched them act as if nothing had happened. Their only concern was none at all. Not regarding me, not regarding the house, not regarding anything except themselves. That evening I at last realized I could not wait any more. I entered the kitchen where my mother was browsing her phone. "We have to talk," I said. She glanced up, not really engaged. "What's out?" I aimed for a somber demeanor. "I want you and your family to migrate out." Her head shot up, and for a moment she simply gazed at me as though I had developed a second head. "What are you talking about? This is my house." "No," I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Legally, it's mine now. I'm done being treated like a guest in my own house. I want you to go." She laughed, like I had just told her the stupidest joke she had ever heard. "This is our home. You are just a kid and cannot kick us out." "No," I responded, speaking more precisely now. "It's not. It's mine. Dad left it to me. I have the documentation to validate it." John came in at that point. He inquired, staring between my mother and myself. "What's going on?" She declared, "He's trying to kick us out." John smugly crossed his arms. "Good fortune with that, friend. You're not going to make it on your own either." He infuriated me, but I attempted to cool off. "This is not about you," I said. "It's about me finally taking back what's mine. You have 30 days to pack and leave. After that, I'll have no problem getting the lawyer involved." Red with wrath, my mother sprang to her feet. "You're being ridiculous," she exclaimed. "We have lived here for years. Where are we expected to go?" With a frigid voice now. "That's not my problem," I said. "You treated me as if I didn't exist. Now I'm done. You had years to figure it out." What came next was an unforgettable shouting fight. Every name in the book, my mother called me lazy and selfish. John stepped in too, calling me a spoiled brat who didn't value all they had done for me. She stormed upstairs, banging doors and screaming loud enough for the neighbors to hear. John lingered around, pacing the living room as though he were trying to scare me, murmuring things like, "This kid has no idea what he's doing." I did not, however, back off. Shaking from all the adrenaline, I headed to my room, closed the door, and settled on my bed. Though I kept reminding myself I did the right thing, it was difficult not to feel overburdened. This was not some small dispute. I simply got up to tell her to pack and head off. My own mother. The tension in the next morning was thick enough to choke on. My mother hardly looked at me, like he assumed I would cave any second. John kept giving me these arrogant little looks, probably not understanding what was happening. The children just ran about the home as normal, leaving their toys and snacks all around. I was roughly ready to lose it by the time my grandparents arrived. First in line was my grandpa, whose face was serene but austere. Next was my grandma, who seemed prepared to fight someone. My mom was in the kitchen acting to ignore them, but I noticed her peek up when my grandpa entered. Setting his briefcase on the counter, my grandpa continued, "We're here to make sure this goes smoothly. Where is John?" John arrived from the living room with his customary confident smile. "So the cavalry's here. What's this about?" Pulling out a bundle of paperwork, my grandfather remarked, "This is about the eviction notice. Legally, this house belongs to my grandson. You and your family have 30 days to leave. This document makes it official." John's smile vanished really fast. He took the paper and skimmed it, redder on his cheeks with every word. He sputtered, tossing the paper back on the counter, not really serious. This is horrible. It's the law, my grandfather insisted somewhat forcefully. My mother then at last spoke up. She glaringly asked, "You really want to do this? You're going to throw your own mother out of her home? What kind of son are you?" Though I resisted letting it show, the guilt struck me hard. "Your home is not here," I whispered softly. "It never was. It was Dad's. Now it's mine. You have treated me like a guest here for years. I am done. I deserve better." Her face contorted as she battled whether to yell or cry. She followed with yells. She began, then the words seemed to freeze in her mouth. "You piece of everything I have done for you, and this is how you repay me, after all the sacrifices I have made." "Sacrifices?" I shot back, losing control. "You mean like abandonment of me on my birthday so you could play happy family with John? Or turn my room into a storage unit? Or act like I don't even exist half the time?" "Yeah, thanks for all the sacrifices, Mom." The fight lasted what seemed like an eternity. My mother tried every tactic in the book, sobbing, screaming, shouting. John also jumped in, calling me unappreciative and stating I would regret this choice when I found I couldn't manage living alone. At one point, even the children got involved, complaining about how cruel I was being and how they didn't want to leave. Still, I stood firm. Cutting them off, I said, "You have 30 days. After that, if you're not out, I'll have to involve the authorities. I don't want it to come to that, but I will if I have to." Every step of the journey was backed by my grandparents, usually the nice and quiet sort. My grandmother even intervened when my mom tried to use my dad against me. Tears pouring down her cheeks, my mother had whispered, "Your father would be so disappointed in you. This is not what he would have chosen." "Don't you dare!" my grandmother shot out sternly. "Don't you dare use his memory to manipulate him. You've taken advantage of that boy in this house for long enough. It's time for you to move on." The remainder of the day melted together. John mumbled insults under his breath and marched about the house like a baby throwing a fit as my mother vanished into her room and slammed the door behind her. Spending much of the afternoon with my grandparents, I went over the legal process, ensuring everything was perfect. My uncle dropped over that evening with a locksmith to replace the door's locks. John stood in the doorway watching, like he wanted to start a fight, while my mother stayed in her room, not even coming to stop him, sneering and crossing his arms. "You really think this is going to work?" he asked. "You're just a youngster. You don't know what you're getting into." Meeting his look, "Maybe not," I answered. "But one thing, I am not going to let you treat me like crap in my own house anymore." Things grew even more unpleasant during the following few weeks. Clearly expecting I would back off, my mother and John refused to gather their belongings. Rather, they began to lead as wretched lives as could be. The children left their toys all about, blasting the TV non-stop every moment they had. John ate the food I got for myself, accidentally, and my mother began leaving passive-aggressive notes all throughout the house. "You'll regret this," one of them advised. "Family is all you have." I aimed to yell. I wanted to give a wall some punches. Instead, I told my grandparents what was happening when I phoned them. My grandpa advised me, "You're doing everything by the book. They're just trying to wear you down. Don't let them." My mom and her family had at last begun packing by the time the 30-day ultimatum arrived. Clearly, though, they were not going quietly. My mother tried once more on the last day. She said, "I hope you're happy," as she loaded the last box into their car. "You have split this family apart." I didn't reply. I just watched as they left the house and me behind and drove away. When the door closed at last, I experienced a relief like I had never known. At first, it felt synthetic. For once, the house was utterly silent. I just stood there, allowing it to settle in for a few minutes. My house was mine for the first time in years. Not long after they left, my grandparents dropped over. Second, she walked in, and my granny drew me into a hug. "You did it," she remarked, sounding rather proud. Benevolently nodding behind her was my grandfather. "We're proud of you, kid," he continued. "While standing up for yourself isn't easy, you did the right thing. We cleaned the house from top to bottom all day until we had everything back in its proper position. Though it didn't last long. The first week they left was quiet. Mom was not the kind of person to let things slide silently. She began phoning and texting me nonstop, alternately cursing and threatening directly. For instance, "Don't think I won't take you to court over this." I turned her away at first. Still, the books continued arriving, and her comments started to irritate me. I knew that I was not misbehaving. Legally, the house belonged to me. I was very entitled to recover it. Still, her rhetoric made me second-guess myself. When I called my grandparents to let them know what was happening, they were right away ready to assist. After my grandfather contacted the attorney handling my dad's estate, we reviewed everything once more to ensure we were on a strong foundation. The attorney reassured me, "You're doing everything by the book. She doesn't have a leg to stand on." That helped me to relax, but the stress was still there. My mother was bringing the rest of the family into it, not only attempting to reach me. She began rumors among my extended relatives, depicting me as some cruel, unappreciative son who had put his own mother onto the street. I first didn't even know it was happening. I began receiving strange texts and calls from aunts and relatives I hadn't spoken with in years, all of them asking what was going on. To clarify everything, I then sat down with my grandparents and a few of my closer cousins. I told them about the clutter, the neglect, and the way she turned aside me on my birthday. I even showed them the documentation indicating the residence was mine legally. Usually direct, my uncle let loose without restraint. "She has been using this house and you for years," he claimed. "It is about time someone stood up to her." Word traveled, and finally the tide changed. While some relatives still held my mom's account of events, the ones who really counted most had my back. At a family get-together, my uncle even reprimanded her for the way she handled me. "You dropped him on his birthday," he yelled, loud enough for everyone to hear. "And now you are playing the victim? Give me a break." Not long after that, my mother paid unexpected visits to the residence. Like she was attempting to break it down, she pounded on the door. She started a full-fledged tirade when I opened it. She cried out, "Let me in! This is my house as well. Where are we meant to go?" I stood there trying to keep cool. "It's not your home," I insisted somewhat forcefully. "Legally, it's mine. You've had years to sort out your affairs. Now it's time for you to move on. You treated this place like a free ride." She pushed past me, but my grandfather, who happened to be visiting that day, stepped in. Her voice changed from wrath to pure fury. Her face twisted as though she were going to explode. "Are you freaking serious right now?" she yelled, pointing her finger toward my grandfather. "This is your fault, you old bastard! You have always hated me. Have you been waiting for this moment to turn my own son against me?" As cool as ever, my grandfather did not waver. "This isn't about me," he responded evenly. "This is about you and the decisions you have taken. You have had long enough use of this house and should move on." She still wasn't done, though. "Move on? Move on to what, huh? You think you're so high and mighty with your little speeches, but you're just an unhappy old man sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." My grandfather arched an eyebrow, but said nothing. "Your bed is made," he remarked. "Now you have to lie in it." That simply infuriated her even more. She next turned to face me. Her eyes wild, she spat. "You're just like him. A selfish, unappreciative little brat. Hope this all blows up in your face. And when it does, don't come crying to me. Or to your precious grandpa." Shouting across her shoulder, she rushed down the driveway. "And you," she screamed at my grandfather, gesturing at him. "You piece of crap-y. I hope you're happy. You're a miserable old fool who wrecked everything." Chest tense, I stood there seeing her go, hearing those remarks slung at the one person who had always had my back hurt more than I wanted to acknowledge. I reassured myself, though, that I was not doing anything illegal, as my grandfather gently rested a calming hand on my shoulder. Things at last began to calm down in the next weeks. Cleaning, redelling, and transforming the house into a place I could really call home took additional time between my grandparents and me, helping with repairs and providing guidance on how to run everything on my own. My uncles and aunts also pitched in. The house became more than simply a residence. It became my haven, where I might honor my dad's memory and create my future. I felt great pride and thanks every time I came through the door. To be honest, all this leaves me with some scars, not the kind you could see. Though no one ever tells you how complicated and messy it can be, I always assumed turning 18 meant independence and starting fresh. I absolutely didn't expect to confront all this drama simply to feel like I had a place to call home. I didn't anticipate the adult world to suck this much either. Not simple either, not even close like. Simply because it would have been less taxing. There were several times when I wanted to toss in the towel and let them win. Now that I've come out the other side, though, I can say that the best choice I have ever made was to regain my house and life. Now walking through the front door feels different. This site no longer feels like a war. It seems like mine. I have been giving what follows next a lot of thought. I've been working on making the house a place I could really love, first of all. And to be honest, I should be celebrating following what that went through. I wish to note this as the beginning of something greater. I was considering planning a suitable birthday celebration, akin to the one I ought to have experienced firsthand. Nothing very wild, but something enjoyable. Perhaps invite some friends, make a lovely dinner, and at last enjoy a night entirely focused on positive energy and free from conflict. What do you folks think? Should I go ahead? I appreciate you reading. By the way, though this has been a lot, getting it all out here has been strangely healing. Drop any ideas or recommendations you have below. Hearing what you believe would be great. And really, I appreciate you hanging with me through this. It implies a great deal.